The year is 795 AD. Off the northeastern coast of Ireland, a small island called Lambay rises from the Irish Sea like a green jewel ringed with grey stone. On its cliff stands a stone convent, home to 42 women who have given their lives to God. Sister Brieg, the abbess, is 63 years old. She has ruled this convent for 27 years, since before most of the younger sisters were even born. Her hands, hardened by years of copying manuscripts in the trembling light of candles, shake slightly as she holds the illuminated gospel she spent 3 full years completing. It is the feast of St. Columba, June 6th. The sisters gather in the stone chapel for morning prayers. Their voices rise in Gregorian chant, echoing against walls that have watched generations of women kneel in this same place, whispering the same devotion. Outside, the ocean is calm. Morning fog drifts over the water like a veil. The chapel bell rings 6 times, marking the hour of Lauds. It is a sound these women have heard every morning of their monastic lives. What they do not know is that this bell is calling more than prayer. It is calling predators on the horizon, hidden inside the mist. 3 ships glide silently across the waves. They are not merchant vessels. They are not pilgrim boats. They are Viking longships. Each one carries 30 Norse warriors, men who have never heard of Christian mercy. This is the story of the first recorded Viking attack on Irish soil. A story written down, buried, and then forgotten for more than 1,000 years. Until 2003, when a manuscript was discovered in the archives of Trinity College, Dublin. It was a journal written in medieval Latin by a monk named Kellock, a man who visited Lambay 6 months after the attack. What he recorded does not appear in the history books you studied. It was deliberately erased, hidden away, judged too shameful to preserve. But the words survived, waiting for centuries on yellowed pages. And now, at last, we can tell the full story. Do you want to hear the stories that were buried on purpose? Stories based on real documents that official history chose to ignore? Subscribe now to Wounds of History. Leave a like and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. America, Canada, the UK, or somewhere else. Because what you're about to hear is not fiction. It is the testimony of someone who saw the aftermath with his own eyes. To understand what happened on Lambay that June morning, you need to understand who the Vikings were in the year 795 and where they came from. They were not yet the organised conquerors who had found Dublin in 841. They were not yet the sophisticated traders who would stretch commercial routes all the way to Constantinople, carrying silk from China and Arab silver back to the Scandinavian fjords. At this point in history, they were something rougher, something more dangerous, something more desperate. They were pagan warriors from the rocky coasts of Norway, men who worshipped Thor, god of thunder, and Odin, the All-Father. They believed that to die in battle with a weapon in hand was the surest path into Valhalla, the hall of fallen warriors, where they would fight and feast forever. They came from frozen fjords where life was short, brutal, and unforgiving, places where only the strongest, the cleverest, and the most ruthless survived. Winters often killed half a village through hunger and cold alone. Scandinavia in 795 was not a land of abundance. It was a land of stone and ice, where fertile soil was scarce, where 3 months of summer had to feed 12 months of hungry mouths. And when the population grew beyond what the land could support, young men faced a simple choice: starve at home or seek fortune across the sea. Many chose the sea. These men did not know the Christian idea of mercy. Their religion had no commandment against killing. Their gods were warriors who settled disputes with violence. Their sagas praised the man who died fighting, not the man who forgave his enemy. They had no theological rule against killing non-combatants, no moral barrier against enslaving prisoners, no sacred hesitation about looting places of worship. To them, unguarded wealth was simply wealth waiting to be taken by the man strong enough to claim it. And Irish monasteries in 795 were rich in ways starving Scandinavians could barely imagine. For centuries, kings newly converted to Christianity, nobles seeking to redeem their sins, and pilgrims hoping to earn grace had poured gifts into these sacred places. Gold chalices, silver reliquaries, illuminated manuscripts decorated with gold leaf so thin it was almost transparent, pigments more valuable than gold itself, lapis lazuli from Persia, purple dye from Mediterranean shells, and all of it was guarded by people who had sworn never to fight back. To the Vikings, this was not a sanctuary, it was a vault, a treasure house defended by people who had sworn never to raise a weapon. The convent at Lambay was especially vulnerable, even among already vulnerable targets. It stood on a small island, separated from the Irish mainland by 3 kilometres of often rough sea. There were no nearby garrisons, no local king with sworn warriors ready to defend it. No real defensive walls, only the convent's own stone structures, built to keep novices inside, not invaders out. The sisters depended entirely on their faith for protection. They believed, as all Christendom believed, that places dedicated to God were sacred and untouchable. That even the most brutal ruler would fear eternal damnation before desecrating holy ground. They truly believed no one would dare attack women devoted to Christ, that their prayers were enough, that God would intervene, if necessary, to defend his servants. They were terribly, tragically wrong. Because the men rowing toward Lambay that morning did not believe in the Christian God. They did not fear his wrath. They did not recognize his authority over them or over anything. Kelak, the monk who documented everything, was not on Lambay when the attack happened. He was at the monastery of Kells, about 60 kilometers inland. But 6 months later, in December of 795, he was sent to Lambay to assess the damage and determine whether the convent could be rebuilt. What he found haunted him for the rest of his life. His manuscript, discovered in 2003 by Dr. Fergus Kelly, a medieval historian specialising in early Irish texts, had been misclassified for decades as a collection of generic religious sermons. No one had read past the opening pages. But while searching for references to Viking raids, Dr. Kelly began reading the entire document. On page 47, something changed. The Latin shifted in tone, from sermon to testimony. And what he read made him stop breathing for a moment. This is what it said. I arrived on the island of Lambay on the 12th day of December, in the year of our Lord 795. The sea was rough. The boatman who brought me refused to land. He said the island had been defiled by demons from the north. I rebuked him for his superstition and went ashore alone. The smell struck me immediately. 6 months had passed since the attack, yet the air was still heavy with rot. Kelak walked toward the convent. The wooden doors had been torn from their hinges. The courtyard, where the sisters once grew medicinal herbs, was overrun with weeds. The chapel stood open to the sky. Part of the roof had been burned from within. Benches were overturned, broken, used as firewood. The stone altar was stained with something dark Kelak chose not to name. But what truly broke him was not the destruction, it was the silence. A convent, he wrote, is a place of human sound, footsteps in stone corridors, voices in prayer, the whisper of habits, the occasional laughter of younger sisters in the gardens. Lambay had none of that, only wind, and the cries of seabirds fighting over something on the cliffs. Kelak found the first body in what remained of the dormitory. It was Sister Deirdre. He identified her by the rings she still wore, remnants of her life before taking vows. She had been 24 years old when she died. Kelak did not describe how she died. He only wrote, "May God have mercy on her soul and forgive us for failing to protect her." In the days that followed, he found more bodies, not 42, only 17. The rest had vanished. Kelak spoke to fishermen along the nearby coast, men who had seen the Viking ships arrive. An old man named Con, who lived in a hut overlooking the cliffs, described what he saw through the morning fog. 3 ships, he said, with dragon heads carved into their prows. They came like ghosts out of the mist. They did not row directly to shore. They anchored offshore and came in smaller boats. 30 men, maybe more, Con said. Tall, long hair, beards. They carried axes and round shields. He told Kellic he heard the convent bell suddenly stop. Then came screams, then silence. The men from the north stayed all day, Con said, and when they left at dusk, their ships rode lower in the water, loaded with what they had taken. Kellic asked if he had seen the sisters being taken. Con looked out toward the sea. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice trembling. I saw some of them, being dragged to the boats. Their wrists were bound with rope. They struggled, they screamed, they called to God, to their saints. He swallowed. The men did not listen. Con said some of the older sisters were left behind on the shore. They could not walk fast enough. The Norse did not want them. He described one woman with completely white hair, falling to her knees, raising her hands to the sky, praying out loud. One of the invaders laughed, Con said. He lifted his axe. Con stopped. He shook his head. I will not say the rest. Some horrors should not be spoken aloud. Kellic did not force him to continue. He had already seen the bodies on the shore. He had already seen what Viking axes do to human bone. He knew exactly what Con could not bring himself to describe. The missing sisters had not died on that beach. They had been taken across the sea, taken back to Scandinavia, enslaved. For the Vikings, captured women were among the most valuable commodities in their entire economy, an economy built on trade and raiding. They could be sold in massive slave markets, in Hedeby, along what is now the German-Danish border, or in Birka, in Sweden, or in dozens of other ports, where traders from across Europe, and even the Arab world, bought and sold human beings like livestock. Young women, especially those considered attractive by Norse standards, fair skin, light or reddish hair, could fetch astonishing prices, sometimes the value of an entire ship, or a full farm with land and animals. They could be bought by wealthy farmers as forced wives, concubines, or domestic servants. They could be given as gifts, living rewards to warriors who had distinguished themselves in battle. Or they could be kept by the raiders themselves, forced into labour on Scandinavian farms, cooking, cleaning, washing, caring for animals, working from dawn until nightfall, without rest, without choice. Older women, those past childbearing age or considered less valuable, were often killed immediately. If they could not walk fast enough, they were left behind, or sold cheaply for harsh labour in mines or remote farms. Each woman's fate depended on her age, her appearance, her health, and pure chance, on which Viking claimed her as his share of the plunder. There was no mercy in this system, no respect for sacred vows, no recognition of lives devoted to God. They were not seen as nuns, they were seen as property. Kellic continued his investigation. He spoke to another witness, a woman named Muin, who lived on a farm near the coast. What she saw filled in the details Con could not bring himself to describe. When the men from the north came out of the convent, she said, some carried heavy sacks that clinked as they moved, gold and silver from the holy relics. Others carried bundles of parchment, the illuminated manuscripts the sisters had spent years creating. The Vikings could not read them, but they understood their value. Muin also saw the sisters. The older ones, she said quietly, the ones who could not walk fast enough. They were left behind. She described one woman with completely white hair, falling to her knees, raising her hands toward the sky, praying out loud. One of the invaders laughed. Muin stopped speaking. Kellic did not press her. He had already seen enough, but in his manuscript he recorded something else, something that historians still debate to this day. Inside the ruined chapel, carved into the stone walls, he found deep scratches, not symbols, not decorations, words, Latin words, barely legible, carved in haste. Miserere nobis, have mercy on us. Kellic believed these were the final prayers of the sisters, scratched into the stone as they waited for the invaders. But some modern historians suggest another possibility. Perhaps they were carved later by survivors who returned, trying to make sense of what had happened. Or perhaps by Kelloc himself, a memorial for women who never received proper burial. In 2011, archaeologists from University College Dublin, led by Dr. Giovan Connor, conducted systematic excavations on Lambay. At first they were searching for evidence of later Viking settlements from the 9th century, but what they found was older and far more disturbing. In a layer of soil carbon dated to around 795 AD, give or take 10 years, they uncovered widespread signs of destruction. Charred wood that had once been roofs and beams, stones cracked from intense heat, evidence of fires so powerful they had partially melted metal, fragments of Irish pottery, bowls and jugs used in the convent, many of them deliberately shattered, not worn down by time, but broken by force, crushed under boots, scattered across the ground. They also found twisted fragments of metal, at first unrecognizable, but metallurgical analysis revealed what they once had been. Religious objects made of bronze and silver, chalices, patens, melted beyond recognition by fire, left behind because the Vikings only wanted pure precious metals. Gold and silver they could easily melt down and reuse, not complex objects that required effort to process. And then they found the bones, 17 human skeletons, all female, confirmed through pelvic and cranial analysis. Every single one showed clear signs of violent trauma at or just before death. Skulls fractured by heavy blows. Fractures consistent with Viking axes splitting through bone. Broken ribs, some with patterns that forensic anthropologists recognize as the result of blades piercing the torso. These were not people killed from behind, not victims taken by surprise. These were women who had faced their attackers, who had tried desperately, futilely, to defend themselves. The ages of the skeletons ranged from about 16 to nearly 70. DNA extracted from their teeth confirmed they were local Irish women, genetically consistent with medieval Celtic populations. Isotope analysis of their dental enamel revealed diets typical of monastic life, high in grains, barley and oats, moderate amounts of fish and dairy, very little red meat, austere, disciplined. Exactly what we know of convent life in that era. These were the sisters of Lambay, the 17 Kelloc had found centuries earlier, the ones who were not taken, the ones who died where they stood. But the archaeologists found something else. In a separate area, near what would have been the convent garden, they uncovered a single skeleton, buried carefully. Not thrown aside like the others, a woman around 60 years old. Beside her, fragments of what had once been a book. The pages had decayed beyond recognition, but traces of gold pigment and lapis lazuli remained, materials used in high-value illuminated manuscripts. The archaeologists believed this was Sister Brieg, the abbess. Someone had buried her properly. Months later, most likely, Kelloc, with the gospel she had spent 3 years creating. The manuscript itself had been destroyed by time and soil, but he made sure she was not alone. A small act of respect in the middle of unimaginable horror. In the final pages of his account, Kelloc's tone changes. It becomes personal. "I remained on Lambay for 7 days," he wrote. "I buried those I could find. I prayed for their souls. I prayed for those who were taken, that God may protect them wherever they are." Then he wrote something that still echoes across the centuries. "But above all, I prayed for forgiveness, because we failed them. We built convents on isolated islands. We told these women that God would protect them, and then allowed men without God to destroy them." Kelloc recommended that Lambay be abandoned forever. "This place is stained with innocent blood," he wrote. "It cannot be made holy again. It cannot be lived in again. Let it return to the sea and the wind. Let God judge what happened here, because I cannot." But the most unsettling part of his manuscript comes at the very end, because there Kellock included something that was not his own testimony. It was a story told to him by a travelling merchant, a man who moved between Ireland and Scandinavia, trading amber and furs. The merchant said that in the winter of 796, 1 year after the attack, he was in a slave market in Hedeby, a Viking trading port in what is now Denmark, and there he saw Irish women being sold. He recognised them by their red hair and by the way they prayed in Latin when they thought no one could hear them. The merchant told Kellock he tried to buy the freedom of one of them, a young woman who said her name was Awaifa, but the price was too high. She was sold to a Norwegian farmer, taken north. I never saw her again, the merchant said, but before she was taken, she gave me a message. Tell the sisters that we pray every night, even here, even now. We still pray. Kellock ended his manuscript with these words. I record this not as a story of victory, nor of defeat, but as testimony. Testimony that faith can survive where bodies cannot. That even in captivity, even in pagan lands, these women kept their souls. The Northmen took their bodies. God kept the rest.